and I'm going to get this recording started as well. So, and then we'll turn it over to Wayne from SignalFire, partner here, and Seth Price, Sam, and Maddy to share what they're working on. So, I'm Michael Martin. I lead the communities program at SignalFire. SignalFire is a venture capital firm. We're based in Silicon Valley. We invest in seed companies through Series C. The reason that we are organizing this event today is we have the pleasure of working closely with Maddy from Smith.ai and Saam from Litty.ai, both two portfolio companies that we have had the pleasure of investing in, and who are working on really great technologies specifically aimed for making the lives of lawyers easier. So I am not the domain expert of this event, so I'm going to turn off my video and turn it over to Wayne Hu from SignalFire, who led the investment with these two teams, and then he'll be moderating the conversation from here. So just as a quick note on agenda, so we're going to run through some quick introductions here. We'll have the conversation going till about 10:10, at which we can open it up for Q&A. However, if you do have questions throughout the event, please feel free to type them into the Q&A box on your screen, and you can either push them there, and then I'll be also moderating a chat during the talk, so feel free to chime in there as well. So I'm going to turn it over to Wayne now, and thank you all for joining. Really appreciate your time.
Cool. Thanks for the context, Michael. So everyone, again, I'm Wayne. I'm a partner at SignalFire. Salient for the conversation, SignalFire is a venture fund that's built as a tech company with a large in-house team of data scientists and engineers building products to streamline both our internal operations as well as empower our portfolio companies. And we think of ourselves as trying to bring tech to a historically relationship service-based industry that perhaps shares a lot in common with the running of a law practice. And so it's probably no coincidence that we've invested in several companies building tech targeting law and personal injury law in particular. So I'm also not the domain expert, but I'll be helping facilitate the conversation. And the intent is really to kind of tease out insights in a discussion among the real experts here, which are our panelists, Seth, Maddy, and Sam, all folks who are kind of on the cutting edge of how technology can enable practitioners to do more with less. So I'd love to start by asking each panelist to give a quick couple-minute introduction about yourselves and role, and what kind of problems you're solving for PI practices with your current work. And so maybe we can start kind of across the Zoom windows as I see them, starting with Maddy.
Sure, absolutely. So thanks so much, Wayne, and it's really great to be here. So I'm Maddy Martin. I'm the head of growth and education for Smith.ai. We are a virtual receptionist, web chat, text answering service, and now also Facebook Messenger too. So what we do is we actually specialize in professional services businesses, the vast majority being law firms, many of which are solo small firms, in helping them respond promptly to leads and clients to maximize the efforts that they're running on marketing campaigns, to deliver an excellent client experience through responsiveness, to reduce interruptions and chores such as calendaring, scheduling, intake forms, and really optimize their firms so that they are spending their time on like the highest, best uses, operating at the top of their law license, right? So are you delegating? Are you automating these routine tasks and chores? Are you responding quickly to clients? Because we know that 2 out of 3 potential clients base their decision to hire on the initial responsiveness that the firm provides. So we are on the front lines. We also integrate deeply with the vast majority of practice management software, calendaring software, billing, and intake systems. So we are really sort of in that keystone, as you would expect a receptionist service to be, where we see the inner workings of the firms and how they can be streamlined. And over the last 5 years, really come to amass some recommendations and best practices, and have seen the impact that technology and sort of delegated resources like a receptionist can have on the growth and efficiency, the profit margins, the productivity of that firm, competing with much larger firms, but in a more streamlined way, in a more profitable way that's creating sustainable growth over time.
Great. Thanks, Maddy. And then I'll hand it over to you, Seth.
Hey, thank you, Wayne, and thank you, SignalFire. Great to be here. I've gotten to know Maddy quite a bit over the years, and the force of nature that she is, helping firms sort of solve that ultimate problem, which is, it's one thing to make the phones to ring, but it's another to actually convert those to paying clients. I come from it from both sides, both the law firm side and the marketing side. So I'm a SEO geek at heart who started a firm 12 years ago with a college law school buddy. We divided and conquered, where he would take on the lawyering and the sort of substance, and I would be in charge of making the phones ring, the marketing, the operations, and converting those calls to clients. Over the last 12 years, we've scaled from 2 of us to 40 of us, primarily through digital marketing. And it was my passion of an internal team that I spun from an internal marketing team at Benowitz into the marketing agency BluShark Digital that represents over 100 law firms nationwide with their website, digital SEO, PPC needs. So I geek out on the intersection of both figuring out how to basically make the phone ring, but I struggle as well with making sure that we squeeze all the juice out of the oranges that we are given and making sure that we do the very best there. So that's my perspective, and thank you again for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And last but not least, Sam, could you give a quick intro?
For sure. Thanks, Wayne, and thank you for having us. This is great work from your part, and thank you for organizing all of this. So my name is Sam. I was a commercial litigator at Norton Rose Fulbright. As part of my practice, I did insurance defense work, and my firm was on panel for Lloyd's of London. So I had the benefit of doing property and bodily injury defense work. And my specific experiences include doing some, serious bodily injury cases, as well as wrongful death cases. I also had the chance of going all the way up to the Supreme Court of Canada in the first litigation financing matter. And before all of that, I worked at Chubb Insurance in the claims department. So I have a pretty good sense of how things work from the perspectives of the insurance company as well as defense counsel. What we're doing at Litty comes a little bit further down the funnel from what Maddy and Seth are focused on. We actually focus on the research component and maximizing the settlement value for every single case. And notionally, what we do at Litty is we build software that values what personal injury cases are worth. And we deploy this in 2 ways. The first way we deploy this is by providing damage assessment reports and draft demand packages to personal injury attorneys. And these outputs are backed by cases, verdicts, and computations. And the second thing that we do is we provide funding to personal injury victims. And fundamentally, what we do as a service, we are trying to help attorneys streamline the legal research, reduce the cost of hiring economists, and help temper their client expectations, and doing so at a very, very low cost. That's a little bit about us.
Awesome. Thanks everyone for the introductions. So I think it'd be great to kick off by just covering first the basics of the tech stack that's relevant for PI law. And if we think about the core activities that a personal injury lawyer or firm needs to handle, what are the major categories of software systems that comprise a best-in-class tech stack? Maybe I can direct that starting with Seth.
What specifically, give me an idea of, like, as far as from making the phone ring to intake once the case is in, making sure there's case management to keep track of cases and statutes, making sure that, for me, the KPIs of our clients getting phone calls and touches and communications on a regular basis, really important. Walking people through that process to the point where a demand is made, a settlement is done. If not, a settlement is not done, consummated, then moving into litigation and working through that system to eventually, whether it's through litigation or through a settlement, the final process of getting the client their money. And in my world, bring it back to the marketing world, closing that loop with a positive review. Those are the different things that we leverage technology for throughout the process.
Yep. And I'd love to follow up on that and perhaps walk through what are the most important things to look for in each of the parts of the software stack that you kind of walked us through. Starting with, say, maybe just hitting on kind of like the most important points, say the CRM, case practice management system, marketing stack, case research, et cetera. Maybe we can start with with the CRM, and hear your follow-up thoughts there, Seth.
I think that when it comes to sort of the internal software, assuming you have well, before the client has even landed, there are many choices for managing the clients once they're in. There are some that are PI specific and some that are not. Most of the more sophisticated PI firms are using something that has a PI, either PI only software, or that is really customized for PI, because it is so much different, the contingency practice, than the fee for service practice. So there's that component, but the piece that I think is vital, and that most firms are moving towards, is something for the intake component, to make sure that the intake, that whether it's a live answer at your firm, or whether you're using Maddy and her shop, that the intake is being recorded and tracked, and to make sure that you are not leaving opportunity on the table. So before they even become a client, making sure that through great interpersonal, through both interpersonal connections, but to scale, you need to be able to monitor, track, and follow up, and that the software that you use for that first component, and we've seen that the major players have been acquiring and combining. So you've seen, for instance, you've seen Clio acquire Lexicata, that became Clio Grow. You've seen Filevine get Lead Docket. You've seen Internet Brands acquire one. So each different group, people are seeing the value of it, and there seems to be a consolidation where you don't want the chocolate without the peanut butter.
Yeah, and actually that's like the initial trigger for the workflow too, right? Like if you have that intake, that kicks off everything else in the workflow. Even perhaps before that, if you're using call tracking or listening tools on your site, maybe even heat mapping on your site, you can get an indication for quality and what's coming into that funnel with tech, and the quality of those calls with something like CallRail or call tracking metrics. But really the first point where you have some work to do, and not just, sort of poking around and researching and optimizing your campaigns, that's where that CRM starts. That's where the intake happens.
Yeah, and maybe this is a good opportunity, Maddy, to talk about how Smith sort of fits into that stack, and how, obviously we know that it's sort of compatible with Clio and a bunch of other case management software, but what have you sort of seen with the clients that have deployed in that framework?
So I think that, everything starts off with really great intentions, but then people are spread really thin. So most firms strive to answer all their calls, but it's just not possible. So we always start the conversation not from a point of like blame or shame. Why are you not answering your calls? How could you possibly not answer chat on your website? It's just not possible. And it's not also the best use of that opportunity cost of the hourly rate, right? Even for a paralegal, like that's billable time. You shouldn't be repurposing them as your chat agent. But what's critical is that you're responsive, because what we see from the Clio report is that potential clients, 39% feel urgency to hire a lawyer, and lawyers say only 15% of them report sensing a client's urgency. So what does that mean? It's a huge mismatch, right?
And I would say, Maddy, part of the job of your team, whether it's outsourced or whether it's internal, is getting that 39% and getting it to 80%. Like if you educate people as to what's going on, what the importance is of having somebody on your side, that this is your headache, you're injured, you don't know how you're going to be able to pay your bills. The moment it becomes somebody else's problem, if you create and help, get that urgency number up, that's going to make you a stronger business.
I will tell you something else, Seth. Also, there are so many people who say, I'm not even convinced I need to hire a lawyer. So if you're dealing with that optimal population that's already identified that they definitely want to hire a lawyer and they feel a sense of urgency towards that goal, those are your best potential clients by far. You don't have to sell them as hard, right? And they probably even have like a referral behind them, or they read your reviews. They are waiting to be captured by you and taken care of. And really, it just comes down to a response. But the tech here is important. So what does the tech mean? It means that in a couple examples, there are many reaches towards this, but one is we need to be mindful of language and bilingual, especially in the US. So if you reach us, and especially even by chat, if you're on a website, you're not quite sure, can this law firm serve you as a predominantly Spanish speaking person? We actually have real-time English-Spanish translation. So no matter what agent you contact, you actually can have a perfect conversation. Even if I speak English, my chats can appear in Spanish for you and your Spanish chats in English for me. That's really impactful. You immediately reduce a barrier to that conversation. You also have all conversations logged in your CRM to trigger that workflow, and eliminating any spam, whether it's coming online or it's on a phone call. You want to make sure that if you are adding a system in, that it's also filtering out noise. Like what we don't want to do is have every single call then load up into your CRM, and that's a triggered workflow. Well, for what? That person's not a lead. They're calling you from Marriott hotels, right? So you have to have really good filtering in place, because your database that you're building now for that nurturing that's going to happen, and Seth, you can talk more about that, and the sales process, and where Litty comes into that in facilitating the conversion, right? Because you're adding all this value and you're reducing barriers with the funding. You want to have a great database that you can work. So you have to keep the spam out too.
Yep. And one of the things that I'll add before kind of pulling on some of the great threads that you're pushing the conversation, Maddy, is from the Google context. I remember lost calls, the re-engagement rates that we saw for local services is in the range of 2 to 3%. So once somebody calls and doesn't get somebody on the other end of the line, they're by all effective means a lost customer, right? And so that's kind of like the inverse of the spam. The filtering issue is sort of when you do get quality calls, making sure that you have that 24/7 coverage, so that you don't have kind of a leaky bucket and you're losing high quality leads.
You will not call them back. It's not even a game of phone tag anymore, because of the prevalence of spam and the spoofing that happened when even a local number like looks like it's not spam, but it is. People don't answer their calls. And it's the same thing that you do, and you're wondering why your clients don't pick up. You filter your calls the exact same way,
But look, there's ways around it. I mean, our internal team, so we miss a call, they're immediately calling back. So let's say it's transferring to a Smith AI, and we're not sure whether we'll immediately call it back. You're right. Not everybody's going to answer. Hang up, call again. That's what you do when you're calling your bestie and they don't pick up.
Trying multiple times. Totally. So that's actually a really good point. If you don't have more than one attempt, you're absolutely missing out, and you are letting your competition be the one who attempts multiple times, right? So even having that little small percent as an add-on, because you called a couple extra times, or you did email, or maybe you're even texting them to see, hey, are you sincere and interested? Sorry, we missed you. You can capture that extra little margin that does make a difference. Seth, I totally agree with you.
And look, and meeting people where they want. If they want to be texted, text them. If they want to be emailed, email.
Exactly.
But it's, again, I've sort of, it's funny, I've come full circle. For years, there were people that advocated drip campaigns, and we started with criminal before moving into PI, and we have both now. But the idea that like this urgency, if you get somebody who's interested, the idea that you're like, oh yeah, we'll call you back in a few days, versus, the idea is it takes so much. I mean, at BluShark, we spend so much time, money, and effort to get the phone to ring. You've now answered it, right? So now you better take advantage of that, because if you don't, there are all these consultants that are like coming to firms, oh, we want more calls. No, just take advantage of the calls you have, and getting a higher percentage.
What does Gary Falkowitz say? Exactly. Like, what's the very first thing that one of the most preeminent like consultants in the country is going to do? He's going to say, let me listen to your phone calls. That is what one of the highest paid consultants, one of the best consultants who wrote the book on intake is going to do. He's going to listen to your calls.
And look, and so for years I poo-pooed that. I was like, oh, I can hear my team and I'm fine. Right. And then Gary, who's like a friend and mentor, love this guy, he's like, got to listen. So finally, listen. And you hear, sure as anything, some woman in our team who had been with us and done well for many months is having a bad issue with her mom or something. This is years ago. And I'm listening to somebody, cry their eyes out about a case. And she's going, as if she's multitasking. And it was just heartbreaking to not see somebody engaged with them. Even if you're listening, and now during COVID, you don't even have that. So now it's even more important. But normally you can hear one side of a conversation if you walk into your intake area. The idea that, and even your answering group, you want to know what's going on. Over the years, the answering services and intake groups have same issues. Lots of people, they have good days, bad days, figuring out who do you want on your no call list? Are there people that don't click with your people? And making sure if you're not listening to the calls, you're definitely leaving money on the table.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I guess completing the picture on that process of filtering, Maddy, you brought up how prioritizing leads, including kind of understanding how valuable a case might be, is a huge input into that. And so I'd love to hear from Seth and then maybe Sam as to how you kind of think, how you see the state of the industry. How is that actually happening today? And what sort of best in class look like? And then maybe that can transition to kind of what Sam's building with Litty.
I'm sorry, you're a little confused on the question.
Yeah. So in a lot of cases, it sounds like the process for estimating what is a valuable lead, how much time, how valuable is it, what is the value that I could get.
Understood. I was getting transposed to what we're about to talk about with Sam about value of case, but we're talking value of lead. Good. So value of lead, something that we do internally is we label each lead that comes in with a high, medium, or low priority. And the idea being it distinguishes, we have in our follow-up series, how much we follow up, and basically what resources we put towards it. Understanding in a perfect world, everything gets maximum, but as we talked about, you have limited resources. And even with an expanded team, we have 12 people answering the phones on a good day. Even with that, you can get to the point where you have limited resources. So if all leads are not created equal, and making sure that whether it's what's going to get attorney time, what's going to get an in-person person to come out and help sign up in person versus what you're going to stay with an e-signature for. In each instance, if you can tag and take data points as far as what the potential of the case is, I think that's incredibly powerful. On the fee for service side, where you're vetting for money, does the client have funds to pay? We do that as well. Is there a likelihood of funds, high, medium, low? And on the PI side, what is the potential for the case? Is this a life-altering event? Is this something that is, where there's no physical injury at this point, and they're about to go to the doctor to see if there is something, and prioritizing how you deal with them so that with your limited resources, you can allocate it most effectively. If you have unlimited time, everybody's going to get massive follow-up. But when it comes to the interpersonal piece, I want to make sure that we are not treating them all equal from the point of view of time and attention, but making sure that if there's one that we know is going to make our quarter, that one is not lost in the shuffle. Everything's going to be gotten to, but in what order?
And Seth, I think you made a very, very good point about trying to understand the value of the case from the very, very outset. I think from our perspective, there are really 4 points in the life cycle of a case where understanding value is of primordial importance. The first is at the incubation stage, what you just mentioned. Second is when you're preparing the demand package to send up to the claim adjuster. Third is on or around the mediation. And finally, it's right before litigation. And I think at the incubation stage, where what's particularly interesting is the way that people label and understand the value of personal injury cases is predicated primarily based on personal experiences. And the reality is there are a lot of pernicious injuries that exist where a personal injury attorney might not have as much experience with, but might still be high value. So there is some value, let's say, in scoping out the type of injuries and the symptoms that are being reported by the plaintiff and having an objective assessment of what's going on for the purpose of prioritization and incubation.
Absolutely.
And the other thing that's really important is to get the initial questionnaire right, to try to pick out on the type of injuries that might not be as evident, but might lead to a high settlement outcome. And that requires some honing and research as well.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Seth, I'd love to get your take on, how do different folks handle some of the difficulties inherent in valuing types of damages like pain and suffering, economic loss, and so forth. Some things which maybe are a little bit less quantifiable.
Well, and I think that that is the million-dollar question. It sounds like what you guys are attempting to add technology to. There's a lot of putting things into buckets based on comparable cases that you've had within your firm, or that when you put out on listservs, if it's a more unique situation. But the idea is you're doing your best to be able to put things out there that are commensurate with what's there, the law, and how you can best present this for first settlement, and if not settlement, litigation. So I think that it is very important, like anything. I think we almost crowdsource the intake, the inputs we're getting. I love it when intake is taking careful notes, and then we sort of cross-reference that with a first meeting, whether phone or in person, because you also want to make sure that from a firm point of view, people aren't telling you what you want to hear, but that you're getting something that is accurate. So first, I think it is vetting to figure out what is going on. And then once you sort of have that baseline, trying to determine how you can put those damages in the best possible light, in the first case for a demand, so that you can put the client's case, in the light most favorable to them.
Yeah. And maybe Sam, would love to hear from you on how Litty develops, more of a fact base, more confidence in your assessment, right, of what a case is worth versus sort of, the traditional methodology that Seth talked through.
Sure. I think looking at it from the perspective of a commercial attorney or just a civilist, everything you do from the moment you get a claim until resolution is to try to maximize the settlement outcome. You are trying to position your case better and better at every single interaction with either the claim adjuster or with opposing counsel. And in my view, the easiest way to do this is by being very, very pedantic in everything that you're doing. And what does that mean? It means fleshing out each head of damage that you're claiming for, providing the ICD codes for the specific diagnostics, not withholding information, and most importantly, providing verdicts, settlements, and cases that you just don't drop into the demand letter. You actually elaborate and explain why they are analogous to your case. And this is something that defense counsel do all the time. So as soon as you get a case on the insurance side, as an attorney, the first thing that you do is prepare a case assessment memo that explains how much the case is worth. And this is required for all cases because insurance companies need to set loss reserves. So they have perfect transparency into how much this case could potentially be worth. And they use this a lot of times to bully plaintiff counsel. And so what we do is we scope across all the online repositories of legal information, and using our algorithm, pick out the most analogous verdicts and settlements, and use that to build a case assessment report or damage assessment report that we then provide to the attorney. And what this means practically is that we provide each head of damage, those including pain and suffering, loss of income, loss of services, and support it with these verdicts and settlements. And what's more interesting is this is not perfectly replicable by doing it yourself as an attorney, because we also provide the economic losses as well. So for you to have a better sense of what your economic losses would be, you would have to hire an economist from the very beginning of your case, which most personal injury attorneys don't do because they don't want to, spend the money from day one. And we provide that to them as well. So having this knowledge, you can easily weaponize it in the context of a settlement discussion or a demand package. And inevitably, this leads to two things. It leads to a higher settlement outcome, and it leads to a faster settlement outcome.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to conceptualize the magnitude of that challenge, Seth, do you have some sense for what percent of cases you think settle for meaningfully lower than they should?
It's funny. I ask a lot of questions. I've been to some sort of high level mediations, and I always sort of sit down with the mediator afterwards and just try to get a sense as to what the range is. If you had the number one lawyer in the market sitting in the room, what is the delta between him and a good lawyer, and what is the delta between him and the guy who's punting completely. And what I would guess, if I, to extrapolate, this is me sort of prognosticating, is that there's about a 10% delta in the sort of high, upper echelon of what could be seen. But there are a number of lawyers out there that, PI may not be their main focus, or it's a shop that's never going to litigate anything, that there could be as much as a 30% delta on the average case. Now, again, something that Sam mentioned before, that there are opportunities in cases to discover, injuries that will have long-lasting effects. And if you're doing your job right, you're going to, be savvy enough to discern, other avenues than what the client may come knocking on the door for when it comes to that injury. That said, those percentages are based on sort of the run of the mill. If somebody misses something completely, it could, completely could be, 10x or 20x. But for the average case, the studies that I have done anecdotally, speaking to the sort of some of the neutrals that we've dealt with, is that there's a modest difference at the top, but that for those that are sort of just like showing up, first day at the rodeo, or clearly not engaged, that they could be leaving serious money on the table.
Yep.
For sure. And just building off what Seth is saying, it's difficult to put a precise percentage on the average, but let's just say that for all the reports that we provided thus far, they've more than paid for themselves. And most often what we see is, if we ask the attorney how much they think the case is worth and how much we come up with in terms of an estimate, there tends to be a 20 to 30% uplift in value. And the reason is quite straightforward, right? Because the attorneys don't have the time to do this research themselves. And it's not their fault. They're operating in an at-fault system where there has to be high churn for this system to function. So there is a systemic difference between the bandwidth of a defense attorney and the bandwidth of a plaintiff attorney. So that research component is often missing. And that's what we're trying to build into the practice of personal injury attorneys in a systematic fashion. And one anecdote, there are oftentimes attorneys that are dealing with personal injury cases don't have someone looking over their shoulders. They're probably new to practice, and they have one or two cases, and they're sort of running with it, and they learn as the years progress. And we're sort of someone that's looking over your shoulder, that gives you a second opinion as to what's going on. And oftentimes things are missed, like, loss of services. It's a very, very easy head of damage to claim in most states, and it's often forgotten. Things like prejudgment interest in other states, and these things add up. And that's really the reason why we exist, to sort of help personal injury attorneys build robust research and lead principled discussions from a very early stage in their cases.
Sam, I just want to speak to that for a second, because you touched on something, and I want to make sure that it was really clear to everyone here. What you're saying about building confidence and having that confirmation from the research, from the software, that accelerates that discussion, that decision-making process for the attorney, for the firm, and it makes that argument so much stronger, even in the delivery of it by the attorney, right, by the associate to that potential client. That's an accelerator. You just put like an accelerator on that fire, and you feel so much more confident moving forward, right? Like, not only do you have the data faster, but you also have the better data to move ahead and not looking back.
Absolutely, and I think there is some antagonistic language between defense and plaintiff counsel, but the reality is, if I'm a claim adjuster, I need the help of plaintiff counsel to help me get the settlement approved for the amount they're asking for. And if I'm just getting a demand package with just the medicals and nothing else, it's very difficult for me to go and justify to my boss that we should be settling this for 20% above what I settle all these other cases for. So in a way, if the plaintiff counsel looks at himself as someone that is helping his counterpart to get to the higher settlement, this is what you're trying to work towards. You're trying to work towards a justification that's based in principle and fact.
So maybe it's even like a management tool for, senior partners at the firm to help other associates do better work sooner and faster. It's a learning tool for them to see, what were your assumptions and what does the, Litty data actually say?
Absolutely. And it's so difficult to benchmark the success of junior associates at a firm. You often have them being compared to senior partners or their peers at some firms, not even all firms. But Litty provides them with an objective benchmark of, what was your case, what was the injury type, and what was your outcome? And here is a comparable bunch of cases where, and these are the range of settlements, and this is where you lie on that range. So it gives them an objective internal assessment capability as well.
Thank you. I realize we're almost up on time before our Q&A section. So maybe a final question to the panelists. One part of the funnel from sort of, lead acquisition to filtering to that we maybe haven't talked as much about is actually post-engagement, right? The marketing. So maybe I could, I'd love to open it up to the group, perhaps Maddy, on some best practices that we've seen here after the actual engagement.
So you're talking about reviews and reputation.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I mean, there is a key window for building momentum there from that positive sentiment that does have sort of an expiration on it, right? Like
I call it a half-life.
There's a half-life. So what happens is, and Seth can speak to this too, you need to really capitalize on that sentiment when it's strongest and as early as possible. There's a really cool new company that I've been working with. We have a webinar coming up with them actually called Nice Job. And they automate and actually use text to send a lot of review requests. And that is a very high, as we know, like text far outperforms email in terms of requests for short commentary, right? Like you're not going to write a novel over text, but you could absolutely review something. We know that from Google Maps and Yelp and all the apps that exist already where you're typing on your phone to write a review. It's really important that you're specific, not only prompt, but you give very clear directions on, what is most beneficial, some examples of things to touch on in your review. Don't assume that people know how to write a good review, and those keywords that people use, just by simply steering them with a couple, ideas or inspiration, can generate much better search results for you. And that's where I will sort of punt to Seth to talk.
When Maddy starts talking SEO, that just like, it gets me excited. So yeah, absolutely. I always speak about this as a half-life. The day after they get their check, never going to be happier. By the next day, man, that check could have been larger. 3 weeks later, could I have gotten this without a lawyer? 5 weeks later, I can't believe I paid this fee. So you really do want to strike while the iron's hot. I'm being tongue in cheek, but there's definitely if you can get people between.
Get them before they talk to that snarky family member who's going to give them.
Like, I got double that for my slip and fall. So if you can somehow get it, but there are two. Let's bifurcate this, right? There's the Google review part, and there are now sort of pre-filled in terms. So before somebody just wanted to put 5 stars or 4 stars, whatever they want to put, they can now put great service, attention to detail. They can put, just by clicking, a certain amount of positivity. Yes, words in the review, huge, getting more and more important. That said, number still works. And they're just, Google guidelines just can't tweaked to say, yes, number of reviews matters. We have somebody, 4 Seasons, their loss when they couldn't keep people during the pandemic, our game, we have like customer service people from the 4 Seasons now that act as client concierge during and post case to make sure we get that 5-star experience reflecting in the review. The other piece is for future referrals, making sure that they're in newsletters, making sure that you stay in touch in any which way you can. All best practices, not easy to scale and keep, but anything you can do, because a truism for any lawyer, and if Sam starts, as he looks at the higher value cases, most of the great cases come from referrals. You can build your firm on digital, but the referrals are what's going to sort of take you to the next level. So, I think everything Maddy said, yes, it's making sure that you're doing a great job, but B, you're continuing that process, just like on intake to get them in. It's almost like, and I just coming up with this now, the offboarding of them from client to post client, that piece where they're sort of sent out. In a perfect world, in the touchy feely world we used to live in, the hug and the handing of the check and the review being done on site, ideally not on your own IP address, all of that is part of that conclusion. New normal, we have to figure out how that's done, but whatever software it is, there's no shortage of these softwares that will help you with reviews, but doing something, not nothing, so that you are closing the loop. And easier said than done. Just like we talked about at the beginning, how it's shocking how bad the intake is at firms. When that client's gone, that's for staff, they're off their list. They've moved on. So they have to go back to the other cases they have. So it's making sure there is a system in place, just like on intake. Nobody wants to deal with intake because they're working their cases. Same with this post part, and making sure that you are staffed and have the resources for it.
I just want to add one thing here. Seth, I always agree with you, and I really double down on that here. I want to say one thing, if you think about it, as also a cost. Yes, it seems like a nice to have. It's not a nice to have. It's actually going to cost you clients. If you miss a call, there's a cost to that. If you don't get that new recent client review and you're not capitalizing on the volume of those reviews over time consistently, then you are missing out on all the clients that each new review brings you, right? There is a volume of new clients that is attached to every new review. That is your new client generation system. It is by far cheaper than any other marketing strategy you're ever going to use. And even your referrals will look to your online reputation, because it could have been ages ago that someone worked with the firm and they referred you. That new referral is going to validate it with recent social proof, right? So yes, you have to do that consistently. You also have to distribute those reviews recently across all of your channels where you have a social presence online, even on your website. As Seth is saying, you could even put them in your email signature, some quote from a client, fine. But if you have a Facebook page, if you have a listing on other marketplaces where your firm has a presence, distribute those new reviews and direct people to those sites that need that new review, that need that update and that recency. Don't just focus on one channel, because you don't want someone who happens to search on Yelp or on Facebook or gets a recommendation, which Facebook has now built in. They see your firm and they don't see a recent review from years. But look, Google, if they had just seen there, it was from last week. So don't let that be the case.
And look, being on top of it, meaning making sure that you or somebody who you trust is seeing the reviews as they come in. Because look, great, you get the 5 stars, great, 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 incentivized team, yada, yada, all good. That said, the other day we got like a 1-star Yelp review. And we immediately have a process. It goes through intake. We look up who the client was. We figured out who the client was. It turned out when we actually reached out and said, hey, what's going on? It was somebody that was having a bad day 2 months ago. They have no idea why it popped up then. They're very happy. They've gotten, they were about to get a very nice settlement, and that 1-star became a 5-star. So there's so much out there, and clients, look, I always preach that we're in the middle of an emotional roller coaster day to day. We all are, right? I got kids in the background. They got vacuums going. If you can hear that in my house, I mean, between the vacuums and the kids fighting very hard to get work done. That said, the clients are going through the same thing, and there may be a moment where, for whatever reason, they're feeling down, upset, unhappy. It may or may not have anything to do with your team, but making sure that you are, that when those down moments happen, if something happens, this was just literally, hey, what's going on? How can we help you? Turning a 1-star into a 5-star.
You can even extend the lifetime of this. I'll say one last thing, I promise, and then Wayne, I'll stop talking. The last thing is you have anniversaries that you can build in with your clients, and we see this really often. A very popular Facebook group that Seth and I are both part of is Maximum Lawyer, and it comes up so often of client gifts. And if you think that your last and final interaction with that client is that review request, and then maybe I'll see you, maybe I don't, Imagine what you can do if you establish an anniversary of that case settlement date or of something meaningful that you did together that signifies that relationship. You can reinforce that referral actually for years to come.
Yep. Awesome.
Maybe just one last thing to chime in from our perspective in our offboarding process. I think these are all wonderful things for the purposes of espousing what the service they provide to the client and trying to memorialize that in one way or another. I think from our perspective, we want to understand did we get it right or wrong. So we, at the end of every case, what we tend to do is, if upon settlement and disbursement of a damage assessment report, we will pay the client to tell us what the settlement outcome was, just to make sure that we are building our database going forward and making sure that the estimates that we're putting out are actually in line with what's happening on the market. So that's the way that we approach it. But all of your comments are obviously very, very helpful in terms of client retainment and marketing purposes.
Great. Thanks for the comments there. So with that, why don't we give our attendees a chance to ask questions to the panelists, any sort of follow-up things that that sort of came up from the discussion. It looks like in the chat window, we've gotten some questions midstream. So maybe we can, as as attendees are thinking through questions, we can start to pick some out.
I think there was a request for a sample report, if that could be walked through.
Yes. Well, let me see. Would we want to do that right now, or should we do that on a separate chat?
Or send it out to people post show? Yeah,
we could definitely do that. And I see there's one question about whether the reports are state specific. So the short answer to that is yes. However, depending on the state that you're in, there might be not as much depth of verdicts for specific types of injuries. So what our software actually does is we look through every state and venue, and we try to compare what the proclivities of juries in each. So it might be the case that a jury in Colorado might treat ankle injuries the same way as a jury in Texas would treat elbow injuries. And so we would report the number to you just for analytical purposes. But the report would always return cases and verdicts that are specific to the venue and to the state that you're actually operating in, because otherwise it's not very persuasive to the claim adjuster or the opposing counsel.
Makes sense.
It looks like we have another question here in the Q&A from Clayton around apps like ZipWhip to send links to clients for reviews.
My answer is anything that works. Like, there's no wrong answer. There are tons, there are inexpensive apps like that. There are ones that are specifically, Maddy could probably name a half dozen to a dozen in the space that are specifically designed to target to get a survey and or a GMB review. And then Google My Business, because right now, as much, and I don't disagree with Maddy, that like you want to make sure that you don't have like a 3-year-old Yelp or Facebook review, that you want to keep your reviews current in case somebody goes there. Google is so incredibly powerful, and that number matters. Quality matters, words in the review matter, but also the number. So making sure that you have a process to shepherd people through the reviews, and whichever, like it's, as Nike says, just do it and start somewhere. You may improve or tweak it over time.
Yeah. And I mean, it's also a matter of like what works well with your software, right? Like, I mean, yes. We get so many questions constantly, and it's like, does that integrate with your system? Because if not, that's going to be a huge pain in the butt for you. Like, that is going to be the thing that makes you switch more than anything else, because you will never, if you just compare based on features alone and you don't prioritize, does it work with your systems? Does it have an API? Can you use Zapier with it? Like, does it jive with the rest of your workflow, or does it require you to rethink the entire thing? You will never use every single feature of the software that you're going to capitalize on. I mean, maybe with Litty, because they do so much for you, that's a different case. But with CRM, intake, billing software, every bell and whistle, you're not going to use it all. So don't evaluate based on that. Evaluate based on, does it have a trial? Does it work with your system? Do you like to use it? Is it intuitive to you and your team?
That's that piece right there. Like, get your team, because if your team doesn't buy in on it, you could pound it all day. It's not going to work. So is the interface one, and does it integrate with your softwares? What mistakes I've made over the years, like I would go for the best, not necessarily the best integration. And I think sometimes less options are better if the integrations are better.
Totally.
Great. Any other questions from the attendees, or any questions from our panelists that you think we haven't covered yet?
I'm really interested, actually, if Sam can speak a little bit more to the funding aspect. I think that's something that would be great to sort of capture.
Well, yeah, I'd love him to expand on it. I think that the way that they're setting up the model and the terms seem like they are industry shaker-uppers, and curious to see how this goes.
Of course, from our perspective, if you can understand how much a case is worth, then that you're halfway there in terms of underwriting. And what we noticed was we were primarily a legal tech company that's valuing what personal injury lawsuits are worth. But then we noticed that the way these pre-settlement funding arrangements are priced today is based on the financial difficulty of the personal injury victims and not the underlying risk of the asset class. And so having a clear understanding of how much a case is worth allows us to be significantly below market in terms of our pricing of the risk. So by comparison, we're maybe about 50% in fees less than the market leaders in the space today. And I think from a perspective of practice management, it's very difficult as a personal injury attorney that's trying to fight hard for a settlement to have their client call them every single day asking if the settlement is there yet. And it's a huge, huge time drain. And on top of that, it's a huge time drain dealing with 17 different funding companies that are asking you for the same information. And you have to talk to them, talk to every single one, provide them with information. And then at the end of the day, you're signing up your client for something that's in the vicinity of 100% interest plus a year. And what we do is quite simple. We leverage the technology that we have for pricing personal injury lawsuits from the damage assessment perspective for underwriting these cases. And this leads to two things. Number one is faster turnaround for approving cases, and B, it leads to significantly lower rates. So there isn't as much settlement distortion. The client walks away with more money, and the personal injury attorney doesn't have to spend 2 to 3 hours at the end of the case trying to settle with the funder for a haircut, because it's equitable from the very, very beginning. And I think it just alleviates the burden on the personal injury attorney from the outset.
It probably also gives smaller firms more of a competitive, sort of stake at the table if they have these tools that are available to them that might be resources only larger firms could have had.
And I think, I'll go back to Sam's point for a second. The issue as a plaintiff's attorney, that the funding companies, you just mentioned something like, they are so draconian at times that you have to go back and settle something to get the deal done. And it's more work. The idea that there is a quasi market rate, that you're not sort of looking at the fact that this is not a, insurable, class of people. The idea is there are people that really, really want the money, but if the money gets too large, it makes it impossible to settle. So not only are you looking for a haircut, but it also sort of changes the makeup of a case. Like whenever you're negotiating something, like if you already paid some money towards it, very rarely does that count towards where you end up settling in negotiation. And I feel that like the downside of funding for a plaintiff's lawyer is you're changing the calculus of what somebody thinks is reasonable for them to take. And that we really, you want that. You need a reasonable client who can, good and bad, assess their case and the liability and the issues, so that if you are able to lend money with non-extraordinary rates, it's going to give you a much, much better chance of going through the process, helping them out to hit their needs during the case without ruining the chances of trying to have a reasonable settlement because of now expectations that they can't put money in their pockets because they've already, spent that money.
Seth, absolutely. We've had so many conversations with attorneys that tell us, when I'm talking about the settlement and seeing whether it can be approved, my client asks me, how much money am I going to get? And that is the only thing that they care about. And any money they got before from a funder, they completely discount. So it's fundamentally difficult for the attorney to settle a case where the payout to the plaintiff is going to be eaten away by the gains of the funder. And we have two guards against this. The first guard is by ensuring that we never make more than the plaintiff. So worst case scenario, the plaintiff makes just as much as us. And the second guard against this is fundamentally lower rates, right? So if you're charging lower rates and you're capped at how much the plaintiff is going to make, those incentives are gone. So those disincentives, sorry, should I rather say, are gone. And so it makes the life of the attorney much, much easier, and it makes things a lot more equitable for the plaintiff.
Excellent. Well, great. That brings us close to the end of time. So I'd love to thank the panelists so much for sharing your insights and the participants on the call. We hope it's been insightful, and I'll hand it over to Michael for final comments on sort of next steps and how to take advantage of some of the things that you heard today.
Well, thanks, Wayne. Sorry to jump on in and come in with my big hook to pull you all off the stage, but it is about 1 minute until 10:30 in the Pacific time here. So quick next steps, we'll be sending out a follow-up note that includes some follow-up email to you all that includes notes from the session. We'll also include the recording. And we'll be individually following up with some of you as well. I know that there have been some interest for connecting perhaps with the Smith and Litty teams. So we'll be following up with you specifically to get some calls on the calendar. But keep in touch. We are going to be hosting a couple of other events between now and the end of the year with the Litty team, and hopefully the Smith team can join as well. And Seth, be great to have you involved in some capacity as well. So we really appreciate all of you joining, all of your time, and we will be in touch soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Take
you,
care,
everyone.
everyone. Bye-bye.